现场的各位贵宾以及媒体朋友们，大家早安！非常欢迎各位莅临中华民国儿童权利公约首次国家报告国际审查会议结论性意见发表记者会。Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the press conference for the presentation of the concluding observations of the review meeting of the ROC's initial report under the Convention on the Rights of the Child。 那我们接下来呢，今天记者会的一开始就要首先有请我们政府机关代表团的团长林万益政务委员来为我们致辞。Ladies and gentlemen, to begin the press conference, let's welcome the head of the ROC government delegation, Minister without portfolio, 林万益，掌声欢迎。
Distinguished members of the International Review Committee, Deputy Minister Liu, and representatives from the Canada's representative office in Taiwan, representatives from government agencies and NGOs. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, once again, on behalf of the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan, I would like to extend my appreciation to the members of the International Review Committee. Starting Sunday, they have spent a lot of time and effort reviewing the report, listening to representatives from the public and private sectors, starting from the legislators to the representatives of NGOs and government agencies. The review committee has been very careful in reviewing every part of the initial report, and they have asked us a number of detailed questions. In the end, they have produced this complete concluding observations. Very soon, government agencies will base their future policy making on the concluding observations made by the review committee. By so doing, we will try our very best to protect the rights and welfare of youth and welfare. In addition, when it comes to coordination among different agencies, establishing relevant laws and systems, and allocating more resources, we will reference the concluding observations. In particular, we will have to make even greater efforts to make improvements in areas where we have not yet caught up with the international standard. This is something we expect from our government and the private sector. We will do our very best to align our protection of youth and children with the international standard. And we look forward to feedback and opinions from the NGOs and the private sector. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
掌声谢谢政府机关代表团的团长林万益政务委员的致辞。Thank you once again to Minister without portfolio 林万益。Next, we'd like to hear from the chairman of the International Review Committee. Let's welcome Mr. Jacob Ekberg-Dwork. 接下来我们掌声欢迎国际审查委员会的主席，掌声欢迎。
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
It's an honor and a privilege to be engaged in the review of the initial report of the Republic of China, Taiwan, and to meet with a lot of very dedicated people in the government, in the civil society, and in particular children. We have met, I think, a rather representative group of people from this beautiful country. It all resulted in concluding observations. As a starter, to avoid misunderstanding, I think we spent more time in preparation of this meeting than in the meeting itself. The start of the review process was, of course, the initial report of the government. And we started our review on Monday, the 20th of November, which was a very appropriate date to do that, since it is the International Day of Children's Rights. And it was also exactly a year after the government presented its first report. When I was here in Taipei last year in November, the first initial report was presented, and quite on time, which is not a wide practice in the world of children's rights. There are a lot of countries that are reporting late. So you were exactly on time, which is already commendable. When we did receive the English version, that was followed by reports known as alternative or complementary reports of various civil society organizations directly involved in the rights of children or more indirectly. We also received a number of reports from children and groups of children. Altogether, I think that was about 20 reports in addition to the governmental report. We produced, as is the practice in this system of reviewing, a so-called list of issues, meaning a list of questions for the government based on our review of the report, and for the government to respond to that. The government did that in September in a very detailed and extensive manner, for which the government will be and is commended. And now we are here on the basis of all these reports, because the list of issues was not only responded to by the government, but also by a number of NGOs, which is quite unusual, but nevertheless, it increased the pile of documents we had. So it was a review process that was based not only on the report of the State Party, but on the input of a wide variety of NGOs and groups of children. The meeting this week was, of course, a follow-up to all that in terms of meeting with NGOs and children and the government. And we very much appreciate the input that we got this week, in addition to what we already received, and the very constructive and informative dialogue we had with the governmental delegation, which was composed of a wide variety of representatives of different ministries. So we are here because at the end of this process, as is the tradition in the UN system, the committee that reviews the initial report and all the other reports to produce concluding observations. Concluding observations is a document that is acknowledging the positive developments in the country in the field of children's rights, and also, where that is appropriate, expresses concerns about certain areas that needs further attention, further development, specific measures, either legislative, administrative, or other measures, to bring the practice in compliance with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So, the presentation of the concluding observations, it's rather long document. It has 97 paragraphs and it counts 30 pages, which does not mean that we have a lot or that we have only concerns, but there is a lot the government of Taiwan should be commended for, and we do that in their concluding observations. But it's reflecting the fact that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is one of the longest documents in the UN documents of human rights, and it covers the various areas of life of children, starting from birth through their civil and political rights, civil rights and freedoms, their family environment, the need for alternative care, health, education, juvenile justice, issues like statelessness. All or most of those issues have been discussed with the delegation, and we hope that they are adequately reflected in the content of the concluding observations. It's not possible to really do this without the support in the first place of the CRC team of the Minister of Health and Welfare. We got a lot of support in the preparation. We had extensive communication on all kinds of issues, practical and less practical issues. We were during this week supported by a team of ladies. I now all of a sudden realized that there were no men. They were all women supporting us, and they did an excellent job, took care of all kinds of little things, big things, and took us to restaurants. It was really a well-appreciated team for our daily support. So that is, and particularly when we were drafting Wednesday afternoon and yesterday, the concluding observations. So here we are, and the presentation of the concluding observations. We are not going to read 30 pages for you. We just want to avoid the risk that you fall asleep. And we make a short presentation highlighting some of the issues that are addressed in the concluding observations. And of course, it's all teamwork. And we divided the work when it came to the preparation for this week and the dialogue with the delegation in particular and the meeting with children, but also the drafting of the concluding observations. So in order to present some of the highlights from this document, the concluding observations, I'll give the floor to the members of this team, and I'll start with Mrs. Lundy.
Good morning, everyone, and I would like to reiterate my thanks. It has been an honor to be here and has been a very interesting week. I'd like to say that when we present these observations, we highlight concerns, but we have also seen much positive practice here in Taiwan. I have learned many positive things to take back to my own country, but the nature of the report is for us to focus on areas of improvement. In terms of thanks, I would also like to add my thanks particularly to the translators. The translation has been of an excellent quality and has made our job really easy, so I'd like to add that in my thanks. I'm going to look at some of the recommendations in chapters 1 to 3. And the first of these that I would like to draw your attention to is our concern about the lack of an independent national human rights institution. We have not come to a conclusion about whether that should be a broad human rights institution, with a dedicated children's rights division or whether you should have a children's commissioner. I think that's a decision for you. But whichever it is, it should have a child-friendly, independent complaints mechanism, and we encourage you to do that as soon as is possible. Secondly, in terms of implementation, I draw your attention to the section on data collection. I think that you will realise that as we have looked at the report, there are some areas where there are gaps in data, and we encourage you to identify and address those. It's particularly important for Article 2, as I move on to general principles, the non-discrimination point, that you have good, high-quality data disaggregated across all the categories of Article 2. And our concerns, as you will realise from the discussions, are particularly around Indigenous children, children with, who are stateless, and LGBTI. And we encourage you, when you look at your data collection, to ensure that where appropriate and possible, that you have data on those children. And also particularly that you have a good system for sharing data across ministries and departments, because that's incredibly important for the realisation of children's rights. Our biggest concern in this area, I think, is around Article 12 and the right to be heard. We realise there are socio-cultural factors at play here, where there is a tradition where children are not heard or not taken seriously. We encourage you to, whenever you're reviewing the law, to make sure that there are legal obligations in every area to ensure that children's voices are heard on matters affecting them. But more particularly, we also think it's incredibly important, given the cultural attitudes, that there is really high-quality training, not just for civil servants, but for all the other professionals who work with children, teachers, social workers, nurses, doctors, judges. And in that, what we want to see is really a situation where children can express their views freely and safely, and that there are no negative repercussions for children in whatever context, school, detention, etc., no negative repercussions for having expressed their views. And finally, in relation to civil and political rights, we draw your attention to some of the issues that seem to happen or occur predominantly in schools, around issues, for instance, in relation to privacy, searches that are not allowed by law, or leaks of children's confidential information. And we encourage the government to provide good guidance to schools about what is acceptable and not acceptable in that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lundy. Mr. Cantwell.
Thank you very much, and I'm absolutely certain that you will all have understood that every one of us is individually and collectively grateful for the extraordinary cooperation that we've had from the government, from the NGOs, from children. It's been really quite an experience in terms of the vivacity of and the enthusiasm and commitment that we found amongst everybody with whom we've had our conversations, and that is something we take very much to heart. I want to concentrate on one issue because I think it's a particularly important issue, but also a particularly illustrative issue of some of the things that we've tried to work with in developing our concluding observations. The issue I want to concentrate on is alternative care of children without parental care. And I want to, in a way, try to explain some of the dilemmas that we had and you have in terms of ensuring that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is best implemented in this sphere, and indeed, as I say, it's illustrative of the issues we have to deal with in other spheres. What we're trying to do is to suggest directions that you might want to take in improving implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But sometimes all of us in country and us who come to talk with you are faced with rather intractable problems in terms of suggesting exactly how to do something. Let me give you the example of residential care for children. Now, what we've heard during our discussions with you is that the vast majority of the residential care facilities are private facilities, and that they are lacking sufficient funding, guaranteed funding, to be able to provide the service on a level of a quality that that one would expect in order to protect the rights of the child. So the obvious reaction to that would be, well, we have to increase funding for these residential care facilities so that they can recruit and retain sufficient qualified staff to be able to provide a high quality service to these children. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is to reduce reliance on residential care as a response to children without parental care. How do we balance the need to provide quality care where it is really required, where a residential care placement can be a constructive, the most constructive response to a child's situation at any given time? How do we balance that with the ultimate aim of trying to ensure that the fewest possible children have a need for that residential care and could be taken care of either with greater support within their own families or in alternative family-based care, kinship care or foster care, for example. There are other possibilities. That balancing act is extraordinarily difficult to carry out, and it's not something that we can say, well, you can do it like this or you should do it like this. But we're trying to point out the need for an overall strategy that on the alternative care, as suggested by the alternative guidelines for alternative care adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2009. We take a lot of our recommendations from those guidelines because they are a recent and well-documented set of guidance for dealing with alternative care. If you take, for example, the representatives of people with disabilities, and particularly children with disabilities, there is not one representative of children with disabilities who will say, we need to put more children with disabilities in residential care. They will be saying, justifiably, we need to try to ensure wherever possible that children with disabilities can remain in their families with the necessary support that will enable them to take part in community life as opposed to being placed in a residential facility. So we are overall aiming to ensure that you think about very carefully how you allocate resources within the alternative care system so that we can move away progressively. It's not something that happens overnight. We can move away progressively from this reliance on residential care towards prevention of the need for alternative care and provision of alternative care in more positive environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cantwell. Mr. Tobin?
Like my colleagues, can I also thank the Government of Taiwan for the invitation to participate in this process. It's been both an honour and a privilege. Can I also thank the representatives of the government for their attendance and for their reports. They've been most helpful. Can I thank the NGOs for their contributions and for the children who showed great courage and insight in presenting before a group of adults. Can I also thank the interpreters, the translators, the signers, our assistants and the conference organisers. It's been a world-class event that goes very much to their efforts. Thank you. The committee has been very impressed with the efforts made to address the issues with respect to both Indigenous children and children with a disability. We would urge, of course, that the government maintain, monitor and evaluate those measures over the coming years in consultation both with representatives of those groups but also with children themselves. I'd also like to make a few comments about the issue of health. And again, we have been greatly impressed with the measures being taken in areas like mental health. But of course, there is always room for improvement and would urge the government to monitor, evaluate and maintain those measures in the future as well. As you will have noticed, the topic of sexual and reproductive health gained quite a bit of attention in the reporting process and during discussions. Can I commend the government for the efforts it has made in this area since 2011? I think they are exemplary. Having said that, there are still areas where improvement is required, and we saw various views expressed by various groups. For me, this is a sign of a very healthy democracy and a healthy debate, and you should be very proud of that conversation that is happening in your country. That said, we are urging the government to think about reviewing the existing program with a view to improving it to ensure that it effectively addresses the sexual and reproductive health needs of all children, whilst taking into account the concerns of children and the various groups involved, health professionals, children who identify as being lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgendered, and also children who have a disability. That said, I think you must be commended for your efforts across area and your willingness to take on board our feedback and engage in a constructive dialogue. As I said, it's been an amazing experience and I'm very grateful to have been part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tobin. Mrs. Carr?
Good morning. For me, coming here to Taiwan was a gift, not only an honor and pleasure, because I wondered which kind of society I will find here. I come from an old and new country, which is Israel, and Taiwan is also an old and new society. So I felt here very much at home. I was very impressed with the vibrant society that you have. Meeting your children was a great experience to me. And I had the impression that they know well what they feel, what they need, and how much the convention can give them in order to develop properly as good citizens in the society. So my field, I would like to speak a little bit about education. And education is a place where, first of all, the convention is implemented. And we listen to your children, and we have learned that they need a kind of reform in the approach to their school life. because the stress that they have with regard to the attainment of academic life with a very unflexible curricula, and the time that they have spent in studying without a time for leisure and rest, without having the real opportunity to study the things that they are interested in, needs a great reform in the concept. And we are aware that the government is working on changing the curricula in order to make it more flexible and give the children a lot of activities of their own, and changing it in giving them more time, more free time, and time for recreation. This is very important to make them happy at school. We have other recommendations within the framework of school, like the question of disciplinary measures, corporal punishment, the right to have complaints and heard in independent committees. And all in all, our recommendations are to make the children feel that they are subjects of rights. I don't want to go into details. You will find it in the recommendations, but I want to add one thing that the committee didn't recommend about, and this is the age of majority of children. Now our scope of, we are limited in our scope of intervention, so we don't have a recommendation with regard to the problem of young people between the age of 18 and 20. So in my personal capacity, not under the head of the committee, I would like to say that there are some problems in this age of majority, and I think that here the society can show commitment to the convention by implementing the principle of the right of the child to be heard. Listen to your children. Take what they think and what they want about their life seriously, and make the right decisions with regard to their ability to participate in young age as a preparation to be good citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Karp. Finally, some information concerning our concluding observations on the last cluster, special protection measures. It's a relatively large cluster, reflecting the fact that in each of the societies in this world, there are quite a number of vulnerable children that needs protection. Although the Convention on the Rights of the Child is not just on protection, but also on empowerment of children, by having their voices heard, by allowing them to take action by themselves in the field of civil rights and freedoms. But there is also a serious need for protection of the vulnerable children. So it is not a surprise that you will find there some findings on indigenous children, working children, drug-using children, children who are the victims of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. First, some remarks on the abuse of drugs by children. We welcome and commend the government for the many measures taken to try to prevent the use of drugs by children, and if they do it, to provide the necessary treatment. One question here is, which we didn't find, the evaluation of all those measures in terms of how effective are they, and do they need some changes in order to become more effective. And for the sexual exploitation also, there is a Child and Youth Sexual Exploitation Prevention Act. And there are provisions dealing with the protection of children when victims of sexual exploitation or abuse are witnesses in criminal law proceedings. And we strongly recommend the government to look into the existing provisions and consider them in light of the existing international standards, particularly the one in Article 8 of the Optional Protocol on the Sale of Children, Child Prostitution and Child Pornography. By the way, a document that we very much like the government to adopt. But in that article, and also in a resolution of the United Nations Economic, Social and Cultural Council, is very important for this. So we like the government to pay attention and amend the law as much as necessary. The last part, and there are others, but the last part is the juvenile justice. We commend the government of Taiwan for a well-structured juvenile justice system. We were provided with representatives of the Judicial Yuan with all kinds of information, also on the structure, and we got a beautiful organogram that shows how the system works. The problem with the system is that it has a number of age categories that are quite confusing. There is an age category 7 to 12, there is a not so clear category, but it exists, 12 and 13, and the minimum age of criminal responsibility is 14. The simple recommendation, perhaps not easy to implement, is to deal with children who commit offenses below the age of 14, not in the context of a Juvenile Delinquency Act, but in the context of the Child, Youth Rights and Welfare Act. And to focus, when it comes to the measures under the Juvenile Justice Act, on the children 14 and older. There are other recommendations made in the context of juvenile justice related to, for instance, the deprivation of liberty and the treatment of children who are deprived of liberty. We received some worrying reports on mistreatment of those children. They need to be addressed. Those cases have to be investigated and brought to, and the DLS perpetrator brought to justice. So that is when it comes to the juvenile justice system. And finally, although there are some indicators that the justice system, juvenile justice system, tries to deal with children without taking them to court, it's not so clear how that system works and whether it is fully implemented. So the recommendation is to explore, for the government, explore the possibility of introducing restorative justice and to promote a genuine diversionary measures which occur before court, because the diversion is a concept that implies that you don't go to court. And what we heard was that diversion is handled by court. So one of those recommendations, but overall, I think you will find throughout the concluding observations many paragraphs that start with the committee welcomes the measures, legislative or others, and there are still concerns that you find in the concluding observations. And the review committee very much hopes that those recommendations are clear enough for you in terms of so we know what we should do. And of course, if they are not clear, and I have been working with a lot of concluding observations in my life, and committees make mistakes, committees are not clear, let us know, because it doesn't help to sit on a concluding recommendation not knowing what to do. Find out what we want you to do if it's not clear. We also hope very much that the concluding observations will be discussed in your parliament and also further given follow-up in consultation with non-governmental organizations and children. I think it shows in this meeting this week that the implementation of the rights of the child is a collective responsibility in which each of the partners in that process have their own responsibility and role to play, but collectively, the civil society, children included, and the government are called on for full respect, protect, and fulfillment of the rights of children. So we wish you a lot of wisdom, a lot of strength, and a lot of money to do it. Thank you very much.
好，我们先掌声谢谢我们5位委员跟我们分享的宝贵的意见呢。Thank you so much to the insights of all of the committee members. And now that all of the committee members have shared their feedback, we'd like to invite the chairman of the committee, Mr. Jacob Ekberg-Dork, to the front to hand the report of the concluding observations to the head of the ROC government delegation, Mr. Lin Wanyi. 那接下来呢，我们请这个政委 and also Mr. Dork, would you please come to the front? 我们请2位这个贵宾呢到这个台前来，我们要进行一个特别的递交仪式哦。我们要请国际审查委员会的主席将刚才我们几位委员所发表的这个结论性意见的报告呢，递交给我们中华民国政府机关代表团的团长林万亿政务委员。Okay, let's have a look at the camera in front of you. 好，我们先看一下前方的镜头哦。All right. And also, we are going to have another photo. For that, we'd like to invite all of the committee members. Would you also please come to the front and join us for the group photo? 那同时呢，我们除了委员之外，也要有请我们这一次政府机关代表团的副团长、卫生福利部的吕宝静政务次长一同来加入合照的行列哦。And we also like to invite the deputy head of the ROC government delegation, Deputy Minister of Health and Welfare, Bao Jing Liu, to the front. 那我们也要再次的谢谢我们的国际审查委员呢，提出宝贵的意见。那中华民国台湾政府呢，当然也会进一步的落实这些意见呢，希望让台湾在这个保护儿童的权益以及机制上面更加的完善哦。OK， 我们再次掌声谢谢我们的审查委员以及我们的机关的代表、副代表。Now please take your seats once again on the stage. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to take questions from the press and also the NGOs. 那我们接下来呢，我们请我们的审查委员再次回到我们的台上哦。接下来我们还有一些时间要开放现场的媒体朋友们以及非政府组织的代表，可以针对我们今天这个结论性意见刚才所听到的审查委员的一些建议来提问哦。好，那如果要提问的这个 我们的媒体朋友们以及非政府组织的代表要请您举手。那举手之后呢，请您稍微介绍一下您的单位，然后再提问。那时间的关系，要请各位贵宾呢，要尽量将您的这个问题呢，尽量的简洁来提问哦。谢谢。And now we'd like to take questions from the press and also the NGOs. And if you want to raise questions, please raise your hand and also identify yourselves before you ask. 我们现场有没有媒体朋友们或者是 NGO 的朋友们要提问的 ？Any questions? Any questions? 有没有要提问的？好，有请。
我想代表台湾儿童权利公约联盟感谢5位委员。Chairman Duke, members of the committee, on behalf of Taiwan NGOs for CRC, thank you for your comprehensive and clear concluding observations. We also thank you for pointing out very specifically the problems we currently have in our alternative care, education, and juvenile systems. We would also like to take this opportunity to urge the government to implement and follow up on these observations as soon as possible and in the coming years, so that the fruits of this week's constructive dialogue can be truly realized for our children. Thank you.
谢谢。Thank you so much. Any more questions or comments? Yes, in the back. 有请。
Okay, I'm a member of ITW, and I have a question about that allowing little children, when they're easily to be formed by wrong ideas, to be allowed to adopted by sexually deviant people, the minority in the society, and to foster a kid that might have a bad influence on them, and they might have a hard time to get into the great majority of the society harder in the later years. So I don't think that it's a good idea to allow those sexually deviant people to foster care those kids. So for the best benefit of kids, we should not allow this kind of risky policy to be recommended. So please don't try to impose your own idea on our good society. Thank you.
Do we have any committee member or want to address this question? Yes, please.
Mr. Kendall.
Well, I'd like to respond by asking a question of the gentleman who posed the question, and that is, by sexually deviant, does he mean sexual offenders against children? Does he mean paedophile offenders, for example?
Of course, including those criminals, and also including those their sexual behavior are quite different from the normal society. They're a minority. So please don't impose the minority concepts on the whole society.
Okay, so that is a question effectively that Taiwanese society has to discuss and act upon a consensus or a majority view that emerges from the discussion. It's certainly not one that we would attempt to influence as such in relation to concluding observations on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There are countries which accept the fact that all persons can adopt, can care for children in a foster care relationship regardless of their sexual orientation. There are countries which are not ready for that, and there are countries which very clearly oppose it. Taiwan will decide which of those countries it will be, on the basis of the best interests of children growing up in their society.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we have any other questions? Yes, in the back, please.
I'm Jian Zhijie from the Partnership Promotion NGO in Taiwan, and thank you for acknowledging that there are LGBT children and young people in Taiwan, and thank you for pointing out that there is a gap in the Gender Equity Education Act, and sometimes implementation of this act faces opposition from some members in the society. In the schools, LGBT students sometimes find it oppressed when they try to express their opinions. I think you mentioned that. And you also mentioned that parents have to receive education about expressing sexual desires or sexual health or reproductive health. Parents, in fact, have to be educated with this knowledge that meets 21st century. I think from the gentleman's statement, we can tell that LGBT children and LGBT families are facing some kind of statement like that still in Taiwan. And after the Judicial Yuan's interpretation this May, we still see that LGBT parents or children unable to receive equal benefits because these same-sex couples are not recognized legally. So the children legally have only one parent in the family, and the other is not recognized as the legal parent or guardian of the children. But according to the Grand Justice interpretation, the marriage right is protected and guaranteed, but the family right is not protected. And so far, the government has not made commitment as to how law is going to be amended in order to guarantee that children can have two legally acknowledged parents. And it's regrettable that the committee member does not include this in your recommendations. And I wonder whether there is any response from the committee members on this issue.
Well, there is, of course, an issue in terms of what constitutes a family and how do you define a family. And is a kind of a decisive factor the gender of the members of that family. The Committee on the Rights of the Child and also this review committee doesn't have a particular, well, they may have a particular view, but not a view that results in a very concrete recommendation to the state, to the government of Taiwan in this case. As Mr. Cantwell explained, it is a matter that in the international human rights arena is a matter that is left to the country to decide whether and how they want to define a family. There is a family that is the traditional family, a man, a woman, and children. There are around the world currently and increasingly alternative families, if you want to call them alternative, but they have the equal rights and they are not necessarily a man and a woman. The core issue is whether that particular family setting is a setting that is in the best interest of the child and takes care of the child in the way that the Convention on the Rights of the Child expects from everybody who cares for children. But as Mr. Cantwell said, and in line with the UN CSC committee, the review committee is not going to tell the government, you should have family A, B, or C, or you should allow all families A, B, C, D, and so on. It's a very important issue, but it is an issue left to the government, and that's why we don't make any specific recommendation.
好，那刚才呢还有2位举手的嘛？那不好意思，这个时间的关系，我们大概在3个问题。刚才这边后面这边有一位您请先发言。
Dear committee members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. There are 13 children's reports, and I drafted one of the reports because I had examination on Monday, and schools don't really attach importance to this review, and therefore I couldn't ask for leave to be here on Monday. So my question is as follows. First of all, for transgender students, how can schools protect their rights? Can they go to the toilet they want to go based on their gender, and they will not be forced to come out of the closet? So I wonder what your recommendations are for transgender students, because currently in Taiwan, there are no active protective procedures to protect transgender or sex minority students in Taiwan, and all the procedures right now are passive. I'm a transgender female, but I'm forced to live in male dormitory, and I wanted to transfer to the female dormitory, but it seems that the schools regard me as a potential raper if I be transferred to the girls' dormitory.
Thank you for your question. You raise a very important issue. It's an issue that is being dealt with back home in my own country at the moment. The issue gives rise to questions about A, non-discrimination, B, issues around identity of a child, and also C, a child's right to health. We haven't addressed that in the observation specifically, but I would encourage both you and the government delegation to examine the ways in which your concerns can be given to the government and to the school authorities in a way which will ensure protection against discrimination, protection of your right to identity, and also protection of your right to health. So if you look at the observations, they actually do address all of those issues, and we are asking the government to create systems and processes that allow for all children, especially vulnerable children, such as children who are transgendered, to be able to, in confidence and safely, raise their concerns with government officials, school authorities, in ways that can resolve these issues. So I'd encourage both you personally to seek assistance from your colleagues at school and your parents if appropriate, but I'd be encouraging members from the Ministry of Education to be thinking about how to address this issue. As I said, it's arisen in my own country, in my own university, and we are still grappling with how to deal with it best. And so I would encourage all interested parties to adopt a mature response that does in fact allow for the effective protection and respect and promotion of the rights of young people who identify as being LGBTI. So thank you for raising a very important question. Thank you.
Due to time, I think we can take 2 short, quick one. Yes, in the very back. 好，我们最后这边。
我们这边都没有办法叫到，都是一直在叫右边，我觉得这点是非常不合理的。那我是代表受压迫者联盟，
不好意思，
毕姓詹，
不好意思，
我要表达受压迫者联盟的
先请他发言，我们等一下再请您发言，好不好？不好意思，请您稍等一下，不好意思，来，请发言。
Hi, I'm a children's representative. I want to thank all the committee members for producing this concrete list of recommendations and observations to encourage the government to do more. It seems that in society, some people opposed to the right to expression of children. And these recommendations force government to do to make some changes. But we hope that the government will be able to integrate children into the discussions in the future changes or the future discussions on such potential changes.
我们团长这边有没有要回应一下？
Currently, there are already some children and juvenile representatives taking part in the curriculum review meetings. And we have invited these child's representatives to express their views on the dress code for students. But exactly who are eligible representatives of children and youth? This is an issue we have to think about further. You don't look like a teenager. You don't like a young person eligible to speak on behalf of youth. My point is, after all, I hope that at the national government level, children's opinions can be heard. I am 17 years old. I am a senior high school student, so I am under 18. Please. I asked that young man to speak first because he raised his hand very early on. Please also identify yourself. I'm a parent. Speaking on the rights and welfare of youth and children, I think parents are left out in discussions. It seems that only a handful of groups that dominate discussions and debate in this regard. After all, to foster healthy children, parents have to play their role. Parents would bear the greatest responsibility. So I do encourage schools and authorities to invite parents to be involved when they discuss matters relating to children and youth. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so the Parents Association from the NGO sector. I'm sorry, we don't have sufficient time to accommodate all the questions from the floor. Thank you for your understanding. I speak on behalf of a Parents Association. I would like to thank the review committee for paying attention to the sex education and the sexual health of our children. Especially, you drew our attention to the depression among teenagers and the high suicide rate. I think many of these problems can be attributed to family background, relationship with parents. So we recommend that the government should formulate a national action of plan in relation to protecting children and youth. Especially, there should be a family-centered policy formulated by a specific dedicated agency within the government that will be in the interest of all families and children and youth. I'm sorry, you already said I could speak. I'm sorry. I know that all of you here are very concerned about the rights and youth of children and youth. And we do respect each and every one of you. Please keep your promise. You just said I could speak. You gave me your word. Please let me finish. Please let me ask my question. Okay, then this is going to be the final question, okay? So we will entertain no more questions after this one. Thank you. Please, the final question. Please be concise in the interest of time. Thank you. Once again, we are grateful to all the members of the review committee, and I think the review meeting should not be construed as a way to make demands on our government. In fact, some of the other delegates talked about the Grand Justice's interpretation of our Constitution, but actually there were procedural flaws in that particular interpretation. So to sum up, the interpretation number 748 is unconstitutional because of its procedural flaws. However, many groups leverage that interpretation to demand government amend laws. However, this has infringed upon the civil liberty of many citizens of our country. In terms of the general principles, one of them talk about how do we resolve the resistance to the implementation of Gender Equity Education Act. Resistance? What does that mean? After all, a society should welcome different opinions. If you consider different opinions as a force of resistance, then I think we are running afoul of anti-discrimination principle. What is discrimination? If you consider people who disagree with you as people who discriminate against you, then there's no tolerance of different opinions in our society. In that way, there's no way we can substantiate our democratic values. Rather, now laws and regulations are used to cram down on different opinions. So how do we protect the rights of the people to freedom of speech? On the issue of a handful of experts or child representatives dominating the discussions in the national curriculum review meetings, I don't think it's a fair statement, because all these representatives, adults or juvenile, have been approved by a legal procedure. Therefore, I don't think we can negate the eligibility or qualification of representatives based on your personal opinions. As for the debate arising from the curriculum guidelines, I believe we have to raise issues through the existing procedures. After all, the conclusion represents the opinions of those attending the review meetings. And I think through this week, we have heard opinions expressed by both parents and children's and youth representatives. So please trust in the government and the review committee as we all aim to provide better protection for our youth and children. And I don't think we need to burden our committee members with certain domestic issues that we are yet to find consensus on. We need to find reasonable solutions for these differences there are in our society. I think that pretty much concludes today's press conference. However, our answers are not answered. We do have representatives from different government agencies and ministries, so they will stay on to answer your questions. But I think our committee members have another appointment at the presidential office, so we hope they will have the opportunity to talk to people from the presidential office. I'm sure that communication will do a lot of good to our children and youth. Thank you very much. I already said we will not entertain any other questions for now. Once again, with a round of applause, let's thank members of the review committee. Throughout this week, they have been working so hard. In fact, 1 year before this week, they have spent a lot of time reviewing the reports.
All of our committee members, once again, we'd like to thank you for your feedback and insights. And maybe that's why that we have so much discussion today. So thank you so much. It's very good to raise questions, to raise discussions. So we'd like to thank all of our committee members once again for your great work, for your great efforts. And I heard that you're going to the National Palace Museum this afternoon. Have fun, okay? Thank you so much. Job well done, thank you. 我们非常谢谢我们的国际审查委员哦，谢谢。那我们审查委员呢，我们等一下还有行程哦，必须要先行离开。那我们等一下呢，我们团长政委这边呢也会有媒体联访的时间呢，我们请媒体朋友们呢可以到这个台前来，谢谢您。我们知道现场大家都是非常关心儿少的权益、儿少的这个制度哦，因此呢难免会有点激动，我们当然可以理解。那我们要非常谢谢现场的所有的长官贵宾您的莅临。那如果刚才呢有现场的这个代表觉得问题没有获得解决，没有人回应的话呢，我们现场呢都还有政府机关的代表哦，都欢迎大家呢可以稍微留下来。那我们等一下呢都还有私底下讨论的时间，我们要非常谢谢现场的所有的贵宾，我们媒体朋友们，我们政府机关团的代表，也要非常谢谢我们现场 NGO 非政府组织的代表哦，大家呢其实都有自己非常关心的这个领域。那当然呢，今天我们集结在中华民国儿童权利公约首次国家报告国际审查会议的这个结论性意见发表记者会的现场呢，我们希望能够确实的达到意见双向沟通的这个目的哦。那我想呢，今天我们也非常的开心，能够现场有这么多的意见，现场有这么多的问题哦，代表的是我们还需要更多的对话，更多的沟通。我们再次谢谢现场的各位贵宾。那我们今天的这个审查会议呢，我们今天的记者会呢，就到此告一段落。Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for your participation. We thank you so much for your questions. We think that's very thought-provoking. We thank you so much for your inputs. Thank you again. And for that, we're going to wrap up the press conference today. Thank you. 再次谢谢现场的所有的贵宾哦。我们也要非常谢谢这几天以来呢，非常辛苦工作的我们的口译员，我们是不是也给我们的口译老师们一个热烈的掌声？谢谢。Thank you once again to our interpreters. Thank you. Great job done. Thank you so much. Thank you.